Hi, it's Dennis Daly. If you want to use the image of Laurel and Hardy in advertising or for some other project, you need to call a company that was once owned by Larry Harmon. Larry Harmon was the original Bozo the Clown on records and then on television in Los Angeles, and he put together the Bozo School. But before Stan Laurel died, he took a shine to Larry and decided to let Larry Harmon's company be the licensee of Laurel and Hardy. Larry, I talked to him in his office in Los Angeles, told me that nearly everyone in our age bracket loved Laurel and Hardy.
I, like so many millions of people around the world, grew up loving Laurel and Hardy. And I remember as a little boy, my brother and I used to go for a nickel, and we'd sit in the theater in the early 30s, and we'd sit there all day, and my mother and father used to come to get us out of there because we probably watched it 3 or 4 times. That was the dream, though. I mean, watching Laurel and Hardy. I mean, there was magic times. First of all, movies were, too. And as a little boy, movies, remember, what was sound? Sound wasn't more than 4 or 5 years old by then. So there I was watching Laurel and Hardy. Now, skip over all those years, okay? They've always been number one to me. The two greatest comedians, comic team of all time. And
an unlikely team to have put together.
And well, yeah, you want to backtrack for a minute about that one? Because then I'll tell you how the magic came for me. But I guess I have the good fortune of being one of maybe the last people around whose mind is totally absorbed one-on-one from Stan Laurel himself to that he gave to me all those years I worked with him. So now everything I know about Stan, his background, his life, his working life, his Oliver Hardy, that whole thing is the hundreds of hours, maybe 1,000 we spent together, were all registered in my mind now. So I can touch almost any subject at all regarding Laurel and Hardy. And this is very exciting because for those who know Laurel and Hardy and love them, oh, I didn't know that. Really? Oh! So Stan, first of all, didn't really like to be known as the actor, the comedian. He loved to write. Loved to write. And if he could have been known better than anything for anything, he always told me, he said, I'd rather be known as a writer than anything in this whole world. So, also directing. He loved to direct. But he liked to be known writer first. And then I guess if you don't call him comedian, actor, whatever. But anyway, he was, and he played in so many pictures in the well, backtrack even further because he told me about his relationship with, what was the fellow's name? And Charlie Chaplin, I think it was. There was a music hall show they did in England. Charlie became the star of that show. And so then when they sent the show over to America, they finally, Stan was lucky, he became the stand-in for Charlie. Here the show, and I have a picture, by the way, that Stan gave me of he and Charlie on the boat going past the Statue of Liberty. Isn't that something? And then I mean, you can recognize it too. But there were what Stan was in his, I guess, teens somewhere, and Charlie was just past that, maybe 20. There were a couple years difference. So, and Charlie, when he went by the Statue of Liberty, said to Stan, and this also says Stan told me, he says. Here we come to America, he says, and they're going to know me. All of America's going to know Charlie Chaplin. And Stan says, in his own head, yeah, but what about me? He was telling me, what about me? Well, you didn't say that to Charlie. But anyway, they came, and he was his stand-in. But for some reason, whatever, Charlie was found out about on Broadway when they were doing some shows in New York, and some of the people came to him and got him out to Hollywood. And I'm not going to go on to the Charlie Chaplin story, but anyway, that really got to Stan. Now, Stan took over Charlie's place in the musical as it went through America. And I'm skipping over a lot of the story just to get the key point, back to what you said. How did you get involved with Stan? But this is interesting how this all happened.
Well, and the thing, too, so many people don't realize that each of them had a career before that.
Oh, yes.
And that each was a star in his own right, but they just don't show a lot of that. I mean, The emphasis is on what happened after they were teamed up.
Right, because that's the magic of Laurel and Hardy. That's how that all happened. But to skip over the whole story, Charlie went to out to California, you know, the Keystone Cops and all the things that went on, and he got involved with all those people, and he became the great Charlie Chaplin, okay? This got to Stan, though, because Stan felt his value. And so he eventually, and I don't mean too much time after Charlie came out, a year or two, whatever it was, decided, well, if Charlie can do it, well, he says, if he can do it, so can I. So he decided to come out to California, so he got involved as an actor, comic, doing these things for a Fox movie tone at that time, way back when. And then, of course, he got involved with, finally with Hal Roach and whatnot. But there was nothing to do with Oliver Hardy, who was in Florida doing his... God knows how many shows he did, their movies, you know, the early movies with the Crank, you know.
Yeah, in Florida's movie industry.
Oh, yes. And he started and did all these shows down there. Then he came out. Oliver Hardy wanted to be a leading man.
And a singer.
Oh, yes. He was a fine dancer. He was a terrific dancer and a fine singer. And he thought, I'm going to be a leading man. And he was a big man, you know, Oliver Hardy, and at his height weighed about 347 pounds. That's a lot of man. Mm-hmm. So, but this was still a very big man. But he wanted to be a leading man.
But amazingly lithe. I mean, limber, facile on his feet. I mean, it's amazing to watch a man that top heavy do the things he did.
Have you seen some of the dances he and Stan did, like yes. way out west, as an example? You see this big man dancing like he's dancing on feathers. It was one of the great things about Oliver Hardy. Anyway, Destiny. Here we have Stan Laurel working out there at Roach, being an actor, doing some writing, doing some directing, whatever it is. And here's Oliver Hardy spending his time in Florida. Finally says, well, how much further can I go in Florida? So he came out to California, and he thought, gee, you know, what can I do to get in to be this leading man? However, he ends up with the Hal Roach Studios at that time, too. And funny thing, and I have a couple pictures from Stan he gave me of the two of them as Stan Laurel and as Oliver Hardy, but playing just some of these old-time silents where there was no Laurel Hardy. I remember there was one, I have a picture of Oliver Hardy as a hold-up man. And
so they were in the same movie, but not as those characters?
He was holding Stan Laurel up in the movie, you know, as two straight, you know, comedians.
Not as a team.
Nothing. So that they did a few things together in pictures, you might say. And so the years slipped by, you know, in the teens into the early 20s, middle 20s. But see, destiny has its role in life, I think, because somewhere down the road there was two separate actors, Stanley Jefferson Laurel, who was an actor, a writer, director with Hal Roach, and Oliver Norville Hardy, who was also another actor there at Hal Roach. One day in 1926, which I'm going to bring you to me. You wonder, how come I'm going on such a long road to get to me?
We'll get there, I'm sure.
But I mean, I think it's exciting because most people throughout the world, they love Laurel Hardy, and they don't know the background, all these little things that happen. So even some of the biggest stars of today that do love Laurel Hardy, and they sit with their mouth open like, hey, tell me more. And so... and I got to tell you that, let me not forget to tell you about three of the greats in the world, of the three people: Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, and Winston Churchill. Before we finish, you got to have this, because the little bit was so interesting about them. I mean, how Laurel Hardy touched their lives.
I just thought of a good title for that chapter if you write the book, and that's "Say Yalta to Me."
Or as Stan would say when he laughed, and very few people ever copied Stan Laurel's laugh. Because Stan used to ask me, would you laugh for me? Because he didn't really like to laugh. And when he says, if I ever have to do it again, would you laugh for me? Because I don't like to do it that much. I said, me? So anyway, the day happened that they were going to do a picture, and Stan Laurel was going to direct it. This was in 1926. I believe the name of the picture, and I'm not positive, I have to look it up. I think it was Slipping Wives. I think it was something of that sort, or close to that name anyway. Oliver Hardy was going to be in it, and another comedian, and Stan was going to direct it. Meanwhile, what happened was, by accident, and they used to run these pictures, 2 or 3 days a week at the most. And sometimes they do 2 or 3 pictures in a week. One reelers, silence, boom, 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 boom. And they'd pump them out and get them to the Nickelodeons back east. They'd put the nickel in and go see the picture. So they were going to do this picture, and Stan was telling me he'd set it up, and Oliver Hardy was an actor there. We're going to do this. Anyway, something happened to the other actor. Something cooking hurt his arm, whatever it was. And he came to the set, and Hal Roach said, no, you can't do the picture like that. You're not with it. No, you hurt yourself. You're not going to be in the picture. He says, Stan, you do it with Ollie. Yeah, you go do it. He says, well, listen, I'm not going to do that. He says, I'm directing the picture, and I'm not going to be in the picture. I don't want to be in the picture. And they had a big thing about it. And he says, you either get in the picture, he says, or you won't be directing it, and you're going to have a problem with me. So it was a big hassle. Bottom line, he says, all right. He says, well, if that's the way you feel about it, so I'll do it. So now you've got 2 people called Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel. And as I remember, part of the picture was, which shows you the whole career, the 100 and some odd pictures that these two made, 105 pictures they made together. How did it happen? This was the beginning of it in 1926, when they were supposed to be, the 2 characters supposed to be selling paint. And so they go to the front door, and Stan, they knock on the door, and nobody answers. And Oliver Hardy, the actor, and he says to Stan Laurel, Stanley Jefferson Laurel, the actor, he says, why don't you go to the back door? He says, see if you can get in, and if you can, you come to the front door and open it for me, and then I'll sell the paint. Now, that's typical what they did, that all of the whole series. Well, this is all right, typical of him. He says, well, okay. So he goes to the back door, he knocks on the door, and this lovely young lady comes to the door, I guess dressed in a negligee or whatever it was. And he's such a lovable little character. He says, hello, he says, I'd like to talk to you. She says, come on in. So he goes in, and the rest of the picture was, as I remember Stan telling me, was anyway, he's upstairs talking. He didn't do anything. There was nothing of that sort during those days anyway, but he was talking to her, and Ollie starts pounding on the front door because there's no Stan. So Stan, just, would you go answer the door, please? So he goes down to answer the door, and he says, I'm sorry, we don't want any, and he slams the door on her. So anyway, the picture was very funny. It came out, and that was the end of Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy bit, whatever. And it went to New York, and people loved it. They wrote back. They says, "Are you going to do any more pictures of those 2 people?" So when it got back to the studio, they said, "Gee, everybody likes this so much. Let's do another one with them." So then Hal Roach says, "Well, would you do another picture?" And they both said, "No." Then he says, "No, I just want to direct, right? That's all I want to do." And Ollie says, "I want to be a leading man." And then he said to them, you do another picture or else together. And then came the part, well, what do we call it? Well, he says, if you're going to do it about us, call it what it is. I'm Stan Laurel, and he's Oliver Hardy. They said, let's do another one. And that was Putting Pants on Philip, 1927.
Now Larry tells us how he got involved.
Here I am in the early 30s, the little boy loving Laurel and Hardy and watching. And I grew up loving and watching Laurel and Hardy.
You grew up where?
And I grew up well, I was born in Toledo, Ohio, and I grew up in Cleveland. Okay. So between the two, as a little boy, finally I moved to Cleveland, and that was the rest of my life before I went to the Second World War. So anyway, I grew up, and every Saturday it was magic time. We go see another movie of Laurel and Hardy. Then we watch it 3 or 4 or 5 times. So if you can picture a little child, how impressionable one can be at 4 years old, or 5, 6, or 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I grew up, and then of course I went in the Army at 18 in World War II, and we saw a lot of Laurel and Hardy movies that were sent to us and shown us in different places. Laurel and Hardy, and I always wanted to be a doctor. I always wanted to be a gynecologist. So that was my dream. I love medicine. I'm an excellent student. But I was involved in the theater a lot too. I am a musician and an actor and whatnot, and a writer and a director. I got involved in everything. But I wanted to be the doctor. That was it. So I went to USC to be a doctor. Funny, isn't it? Isn't it strange? I went from gynecology to bozology. It worked out okay for me, So anyway, I went to USC. And jumping over this quickly, I was involved in medicine and pre-med, and I was going to go on to medical school and become a doctor. But meanwhile, of course, the world changed, and the thing called television, something like that, came along. And just before I was about to graduate in 1949, 1950, I graduated and decided not to go into medicine and try television. So in my early 1950s, I started my motion picture studio, the animation studio, and I made the first Bozo cartoons. And during that time, it was in the middle 50s when I started the live Bozo shows on the air, and then in the 50s thereafter, Oliver Hardy died, 1957. And of course, I felt so sorry. I mean, it felt bad to hear that and whatnot. But a year or so, or 2 years after that, Stan Laurel had decided he would never. That was the end of the team. Ollie's gone, and that's it. No more. Period. And what happened was thereabouts in the late 50s, I saw in the newspaper, in the Variety, that Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy's widow and their estate, and the Laurel and Hardy Feature Productions were going to sell all the rights to Laurel and Hardy. Whew. Well, of course, that's Dreamsville. Now, I know I had my successful Bozo show on the air all over the country. I know I had my animation studio. At that time was even bigger than Disney because he wasn't involved in television. Mm-hmm. So I had over 400 people working for me. Then I produced a lot of the Mr. Magoo's and Dick Tracy's and Bozo and I was very exciting. But I thought, I'll throw my hat in the ring. I knew he was very friendly. The Stan was very friendly with Walt Disney. I know he knew Jack Warner very well and Zanuck and all these other people. So, but I figured, what have I got to lose? Would it be a miracle? I forget Laurel and Hardy. Threw the hat in the ring. And for a year or so, in the late 50s, and I kept talking to Stan's agent, who was his agent from the day they started in the 1920s together. And he said, well, he's close to Walt Disney and Jack Warner and et cetera, et cetera. I said, yeah, I know that. I said, but so what? I says, I think nobody could love these two people more than I do as I've grown up to know them. Nobody could have proven my comedic ventures into the world that I proved my success of Bozo. And I don't think anybody would baby and protect Laurel and Hardy more than I would. And as far as I'm concerned, I think I have as much to offer as these other people. So he's okay, and it went on. But Stan was very meticulous. He kept meeting with Walt Disney, Walt himself, who later became a very good friend of mine. And in fact, in the 50s, he became a good friend of mine. But and then Jack Warner, whom I got to know fairly well, and I'm talking about big names from yesterday, I guess, and Daryl Zanuck, etc. And so I sort of, my mind gave up on the idea. Okay, so these big studios will probably get it. It's a very valuable property, and I got my Bozo and C'est La Vie. However, sometime it was 1959. I got a call from his agent, whom I talked to fairly often, and when I got a call, I said, yeah, he's going to tell me no. He's probably sold it to Walt Disney or something. He said, you're sitting up, standing down, standing up, sitting down. He said, you're standing up, sit down. I said, okay, why? I said, I know what you want to tell me, it's okay. And he said, what I want to tell you was that Stan wants to meet you. Well, first of all, I got to tell you, if you've grown up loving Stan Laurel and see him all of a sudden he wants to meet me, wow. Or as Bozo would say, wowie, or wow, Howie. So I said, gee, well, he said, he would like you to come to his house this week. You pick a night that's convenient, and he'd like you to come to see him in Santa Monica at his apartment. I said, okay. He said, only I can tell you is, no, let him tell you. I says, well, why would he want to see me if I'm not involved? He says, look, Stan says, don't tell him anymore. Just tell him come and see me. Okay, was this a thrill in one's life? I go to Santa Monica that night on a Wednesday. That was my favorite day, by the way. My favorite day in my whole life. Everything good has happened to me in my whole life is on a Wednesday. And it was a Wednesday. I said, what day should I go? He could pick one with 7 days. He says, Wednesday. Stan says it'll be Wednesday. I said, okay, can't be bad. Wednesday's a lucky day for me. So I go to the door, I knock on the door, and I wait, and he finally comes to the door. The doorman's just, hello? And there's Stan Laurel. I said, wow. And so I said, hello? He says, and it was right in Santa Monica, the beach, He says, you better come in. He says, you'll let the whole ocean otherwise. So I went in and we sat down, and I think it was like instant love of two personalities. He says, he says, I've seen your Bozo show. He says, since you started. And he says, I think it's wonderful. He says, to be able to take a comedic personality such as Bozo and bring it to this world of television. He said, I think it's wonderful. And we kept on talking and talking. And he said, let me ask you a question. I said, all right. I said, what is it? Well, he said, if I were to tell you the best contract that I can get from the best major studio, he says, could you meet it? I said, I certainly could. So he said, well, and he went on to tell me, he says, well, I think because of what you've done with Bozo, and after a year of talking to everybody else, including my friend Walt and Jack Warner and the rest of them, he says, I think you'd baby Laurel Hardy, you'd watch it, you'd take care of it, you'd nurture it, and I think you do the same thing with Laurel Hardy you did with Bozo. And he said, if you give me the same deal that I had on the best contract I got, he said, I wanted to tell you myself that I'm going to sell you the rights to the world rights in perpetuity to Laurel and Hardy, and of course that was a shocker for me. But and he's very slow to very meticulous. Took a whole year thereafter, paper-wise, back and forth between finally settled, exactly word for word what it was. And then in 1960 and 61, everything was signed, sealed, and delivered, and I became the proud owner of all the rights to Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. And then I started working with Stan for the years until he passed away.
When Stan Laurel died and he was the last of the duo to go, he took many years to try to decide who would be the person who should be trusted with the legacy of Laurel and Hardy. The films, the merchandising, the entire concept. He could have sold the rights to Walt Disney, or to the Warner Brothers, or Daryl Zanuck, or any other Hollywood studio, but instead he chose an energetic, multifaceted, talented fellow who was making his own mark in television, Larry Harmon, Bozo the Clown. We've been talking about the transition of the rights to Larry Harmon, and I mentioned to Larry that those final years of Stan Laurel's life, which Larry had made much brighter by befriending Stan Laurel, Stan actually loving Larry so much that in Larry's front office there is a beautiful portrait of the late Stan Laurel with a loving dedication to Larry. I mentioned to Larry Harmon, Bozo the Clown, that Stan Laurel must have felt comfortable with him, that he, Bozo, would indeed be the caretaker of all that Stan and Ollie had worked so hard to achieve.
That was his concern. You're 100% right. And that's what he told me then, too. And that's why he believed that I would be the one to be the caretaker of Laurel and Hardy and the rights, too. And how right he was, because it's now been 36 years, and I can't tell you the millions, not thousands, but the millions of dollars I spent in courts around the world protecting these rights. I nurtured them, I watched them, I baby them, I look after them. Nobody touches anything to do with Laurel and Hardy. As if, I feel like Stan was still sitting here. I feel it. I feel he's. I don't know if you believe in the beyond, and I'm not a great believer in I don't know. They talk about ghosts and beyond and whatnot. I'm not a great believer of that necessarily. But I must tell you that twice in my lifetime, these past 36 years, as not a believer as I am of it, I must tell you that Stan visited me twice. And I wasn't asleep because I know I was sitting, I woke up and was on the edge of the bed. Because that's how I know I was awake. And it was like, I don't believe this because I really don't believe in all that. And he made a couple brief appearances to tell me, that you're doing a good job, lad. You're taking care of us. It was brief, but there he was. I saw him. He talked to me. I heard him, and I know it now. When he told me about taking care of him, and he knew that these other people, as you said, would have a business and be part of it. And yes, they'd have it as a very special, great right they would own in the studio for the rest of their life. But to me, it was more than that. When I was casting the parts to do the cartoons, which I didn't intend to do anything with except, write and produce and direct them, that was all. And by accident one time, as we worked so diligently every week together, and I was sitting and working one day, and I didn't realize it, but he was talking to me, and I answered him back like himself. And I guess he didn't get it for a couple of minutes because he said, listen, lad, he said, I've got a good idea. And I just wasn't thinking. I said, if you got a good idea, why are you keeping it to yourself? Well, he said, I don't know. I didn't know who else to give it to. Well, I said, I'll take it if you don't want it. And he went, he started to laugh. And I said, I says, excuse me. I said, Stan, I'm terribly sorry. I says, I didn't mean to pick up on what you're saying the way you were saying it. He says, for a minute I thought I was talking to myself. But the key was, he was telling me that everybody that tries to impersonate him in the past, and he says today and probably for all the years to come, in impersonating other characters, other people, famous people have a tendency to overemphasize or characterize the personality. That's to emphasize their impersonating or whatever, and they overdo it, so to speak. And he says, they do the same thing with me. Here's the key line. He says, but you know what you've done? And this was after many weeks, well, a couple of years, many months, a couple of years of working together. He says, you know what you've done? No, I says, I don't think I have. He says, you've captured my soul. Well, some weeks before, and he had been sick, and he'd gotten in a coma, and he'd come out of it, and I was on the way to Australia to do a Laurel and Hardy commercial. By the way, it ended up that I did do. He wouldn't let anybody else do Stan Laurel in the cartoons, the voice of. He says, no. He says, only you. He says, you are me. He says, you do me. He became like a surrogate father to me. Which I did do the voice in the cartoon, and later did many commercials as Stan Laurel also. But I was on the way to Australia to do a Laurel and Hardy commercial for a cereal company, and I called him as I always did, and to tell him I'm on the way, and I'll call him when I get back. He was a master to talk to. It wasn't a week that I was there and I didn't see Danny Kaye, Jerry Lewis, Danny Thomas. They all loved to go see him and talk to him. He was a great genius, one of the great comedic geniuses of our lifetime. But of all the time, and he always talked up and how sick he ever got, he always was up. And this one time, he said, listen, lad. I said, what is it? Well, he says, one of these days I might have to go to that comedy store up there in the sky. I never heard him talk like that. He said, oh, come on, Stan. Well, he says, it's true. He says, it might just happen. He might have had an intuition. I don't know, because it certainly wasn't more than 6 or 8 or 9 or 10 weeks before he died. He says, I've got big shoes. I says, I know that. Well, he says, I want you to walk in them. And you're going to take over, but you got to be careful. Nobody steps on our toes. Never let anybody hurt us. Don't anybody do anything wrong about us. And forever in your life and forever on, and all the people with you, make sure they always love Laurel and Hardy, just the way we put it together.
I asked Larry Harmon while visiting his office in Los Angeles what it was like when Stan Laurel died.
I was so close to Stan, especially, remember, he had put everything of himself as the person, the human being, the comedian, the comic, the team, the partner. He'd put all of that into me for 2 reasons. 1, he sold me those rights. 2, he gave them in perpetuity, not just for a while. He blessed me with everything that Laurel and Hardy was to carry on and make sure that the world would never forget the wonderful team of Laurel and Hardy. Now, he'd given all that to me. I mean, he sold it to me, but he gave it to me. Sold it to me because it was a matter of business, but giving to me was something he blessed me with, because I was the one he picked to want to do this, to take care of his life. A part of me left with him, and but I must say the part that didn't leave with him is living right here with me right now, and there won't be a day, a moment, an hour I'll let any part of this world ever forget the wonderful Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy.
When we started the show, I was on what they call the Laurel and Hardy steps in an area called Silver Lake here in Hollywood. And I described what it was like in the music box, which I think was the only Academy Award, was it not?
Yeah, 1932. And the only one they got, except Stan Laurel did in the 60s. He was given an award by the Academy, but as a person that's added so much to the world of the motion pictures. And to this day, I don't care where you go in the world, anywhere in the world, people talk of the music box and the steps. And the piano. It's the Laurel and Hardy. Those are the 3 things they'll say.
It was, for me, the first time I went there, an amazing experience. I mean, I can think of few other times in my life when one of which was seeing the Rockies for the first time, or the Grand Canyon. But standing on those steps and then closing my eyes and looking down and seeing Oliver Hardy chase his hat and the steamroller run over it and everything, I just felt as if I were in a very magic place.
Well, it was and is a magic place. Today, of course, you see it by memory if you see the old picture, but thinking back, these 2 greatest comics of all time, 70 years ago, tramping up and down those steps with that piano, doing the music box in the early days of motion pictures in 1931 and 32 when they got the Academy Award for it. And if you stop and think for a moment, anybody, and just go back 70 years and knowing the picture, if you do, the motion picture, and picture those 2 running up and down. It's a very special time. And if you're Laurel and Hardy lovers, it's more than anything else because of all the things they've done and all the streets they had, all those crazy cars on, everything they did. Nothing, I think, affects the world of Laurel and Hardy more than those steps that they hauled that piano up and down on in the music box.
Larry, thanks.
And thank you. And remember, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice.
One of these days, I'll find the full-length interview I did with Larry about him being Bozo the Clown. I'm Dennis Daly.